What is up, everybody? I'm NoLucksGiven here with your afternoon snap, and today we're going to be discussing the top 8 from this week's Community Gaming SEA tournament. And at first, I wasn't that excited to cover this tournament. It looks like a lot of Loki. However, I promise you, there are some really sweet decks in this tournament. Also, huge shout outs to Snapster Indonesia for putting together these graphics and all of this data for me. I typically do that myself, but I'm not gonna double dip here. They've already done all the legwork, so I'm just gonna cover all of the data that they have graciously put together for us. If you are not already following Snapster Indonesia on Twitter and you still use that social media platform, make sure you are following there. So this is the top 8 breakdown. We're gonna look at the top 8 today. Typically I just look at the top 4. We're gonna get a little bit more data in with this one. 3 Loki lists, 1 with Dino, but also 3 Phoenix Force lists. Absolutely incredible. I know that there have been some top players that have been pretty supportive of this archetype for a while, but I have not seen it really to much tournament success at all throughout this card's release, since I've been covering tournaments, at least here, for almost a year at this point for Marvel Snap. And now it's got 3 in the top 8 here, and let me hide my camera here for a second just to say the winner of the tournament, Pac Emmy with Phoenix Force, played the exact same list that they got second place with last week, and absolutely incredible run from them. Also, Luke Heads got second place, and just huge shout outs as well. You might not realize this if you don't compete in Marvel Snap tournaments, specifically on Community Gaming yourself, but there's a huge contingency of Indonesian Marvel Snap players. They come out in full force here. Let's get into the deck list now, why don't we? And I can actually make these a little bit bigger. First off, the first place list from last week, and you know what? I'm gonna hide my camera here. We don't need to see me. We need to see all these cards here. So the first place list is, like I said, the second place list from last week, and it's a pretty unique take on Phoenix Force. I did talk about this last week, but I'll just cover it again briefly. So we've got the Phoenix Force, we've got the Human Torch and Multiple Man as the 2 cards we are trying to bring back with Phoenix Force, and then we've got Carnage, Venom, and Nico to destroy them, with Nico and Iron Lad being some added consistency for the deck. And then Ghost Spider allows you to high roll. Once you've got the Phoenix Force in play, you can do fun stuff with that, making either a really big Human Torch, which once you've made an absolutely massive Human Torch, the idea then is to throw that power to all 3 locations with Living Tribunal, or in the case of making a large moving Multiple Man, that'll just give you a bunch of power in all 3 locations. And what is unique about this deck is it uses the package of Agent Coulson, Loki, and Snowguard to give you a plan B. And there are some, I want to say, alternate plan Bs that Phoenix Force decks can use, but this one just uses Loki totally pivoting from the Phoenix Force and Destroy angle. We'll take a look at one of those plan Bs in just a second, because there's 3 Phoenix Force decks in this video and they are all different, but I think that this is a really cool approach, and Emmy takes it here to first place. This is also one of the, this counts as one of the Loki lists, so we're only going to see 2 more Loki lists, and then, actually no, that's not true. We're going to see 2 more varieties of Loki lists, but one does have 2 copies of it. That's right. So there were actually 4 copies of Loki in the top 8. So Loki was pretty well represented overall, but it's just a really fantastic card, especially when your opponents are playing good cards like they are in tournament games. Loki's just really consistent, and it's funny that it's really consistent while being like a very random card, in the fact that Loki gives you random cards, and then Agent Coulson gives you random cards, and I also brought this up last week, but Agent Coulson and Snowguard, and then also Nico are the 3 ways that you can draw 2 cards or add 2 cards to your hand, playing none of those just like basic add ones. But let's take a look at another Phoenix Force deck now. The list that got second place was Shuri Phoenix Force, being a kind of 2 different backup plans. I think some people call this Nimrod Phoenix Force. I don't know, by the way, why Nimrod has the Gmail symbol on it, or not Gmail, Google Docs, Google Drive. I'm not even sure what this is, to be totally honest. And I don't know if that's I think it's just an error in the graphic here. But Nimrod makes a really great backup plan for these Phoenix Force decks because you're already running Carnage and Venom and Deathlock in some capacity. We didn't actually see Deathlock in the previous deck. This was just Carnage and Venom, and then Nico, which this deck also plays Nico. But you're already playing a bunch of ways to destroy cards, and then you're committing a bunch of other slots to Human Torch, Multiple Man, and Phoenix Force. So there's not that much room to sneak in like an entire destroy. Like you're not going to get in the Deadpool and the X-23 and the Null, right? It's just too many slots to try to get all of that stuff in. But Nimrod is a really, really powerful card that just kind of like by itself can win games. And the idea here is usually that you are going to try to Shuri the Nimrod, so that way you get it up to a 5/12, and then on the final turn of the game you want to play 2 different destroy cards. So Deathlock on the Nimrod, and then Venom or Carnage in one of the other 2 locations. So that's basically the backup plan with the deck, and I would say this is the most common backup plan that I've seen typically with it, with some other combos definitely added here, like Venom and Arnim Zola are kind of fun. You make a big Venom potentially with Shuri, and then you can Arnim Zola it around. We also have Shang-Chi Arnim Zola, which is not something that you see super often. Oh, I don't want to cut off Luke heads here so we can see the names of the players. Apologies for that. But yeah, this is not a combo that like we see super often, because typically if you look at a normal destroy deck, they are playing one of either Shang-Chi or Arnim Zola. There are some Mr. Negative lists that run both Shang-Chi and Arnim Zola, and it's a pretty cool combo. You're not going to have Mr. Negative reducing your costs for this build of the deck, so you can't Shang-Chi every single location on the final turn, but you can still set up your Shang-Chi and then Arnim Zola that Shang-Chi to win both of the other 2 locations on the final turn, which is typically pretty good and winds up being enough to win a lot of games. And I think what I will go to right now is actually the 8th place deck list. Or this was a top 4 deck list. It wasn't, or a top 8 deck list. It wasn't necessarily 8th, but it wasn't in the top 4. It lost making it into the top 4. So this was the other take on Phoenix Force that was featured, this time with actually going for that Deadpool plan. And what's interesting here is we don't see the Human Torch included in this list. Instead, just going for Deadpool, and then we've got Deadpool, Hulkbuster, Hulkbuster being another card that you can throw onto Multiple Man, just to make that a little bit bigger, or throw it onto the Phoenix Force, and then Doctor Strange in addition to Ghost Spider for that movement synergy, and then we also have Forge. So this deck is really trying to get either a huge Deadpool plus Taskmaster, or a huge Multiple Man that you move all around. And again, you do have like combos like Venom plus Taskmaster, though those seem a little bit more awkward in terms of just like the curve of them, I think. So for the most part, this list is more dedicated on the game plan of either Phoenix Force or potentially Deadpool. And I would say Deadpool's like, not really the Phoenix Force plan. So it does still have a backup plan in the form of Deadpool, but for some reason it feels a little bit more, I guess it's because of the Taskmaster I don't know. I think I like this version better, and that's maybe just because I've seen this version more times. This build does seem like it has more that it can do. But either way, 3 different unique takes on Phoenix Force for you here. And not only that, first and second place in the tournament being taken place by Phoenix Force, which is absolutely incredible. Third place, we had Blink Loki, which is a pretty interesting addition to the Loki list. Juggernaut also making space in here as a tech card. Cosmo and Red Guardian and Mobius filling out with the other tech cards, and then the rest of the package is just Snowguard, Agent Coulson, Loki, with Cable being the addition that we didn't see in that Phoenix Force Loki list, but then also Quinjet, which actually makes your Agent Coulson cards like a little bit more playable, and Devil Dinosaur for those instances where we don't have Loki. But this deck is mostly trying to Loki with then just like tech on top of that. And as we can see in the finals, or in the top 4 even, this tech was not enough. So I guess I do want to just explain like this graphic for a second if you want to view this yourself on Twitter just to see how this works. This was the top 4, these 4 deck lists right here, and then in the top 8, these decks played against each other, these played against each other, these played against each other, and these played against each other, and then in the top 4, these 2 played, these 2 played. The top 1 was, of course, this one, and then there was a 3rd place playoff as well, where Sizer played up against Shins, and Sizer took that for a 3rd place finish. We will take a look at this Loki Angela deck as well. There were 2 of those, I believe. And I'll kick myself off the screen here again. So this list is a little bit more of a common Loki list that we're seeing recently. Angela, Athena, Elsa, all just really, really strong cards. Oh yeah, and Kitty Pryde, all just really, really strong cards. Jeff, pretty good with them too. No tech other than Shang-Chi, and Snowguard is kind of tech as well with the Hawk and Bear potentially able to do some fun things against specific opponents, depending, usually in the form of turning off magic. That's the main thing Snowguard Hawk is doing. And then I guess like Cable can steal their tech, Loki can steal their tech too, right? But we won't really count those. It's really just Snowguard and Shang-Chi that bring the main tech, and then everything else is here to bring points. We'll look at this deck in a second. Just a slight tease for Makkari as we slide on by. I just wanted to look. Yeah, this is the exact same list here from Quinny that got into the top 8 as well with Loki. Shoutouts to Japanese Shadow with Junk Lockdown, still somehow bringing it. I thought this deck was like garbage now. I thought nobody would play this deck again, but apparently it can still work. So a little bit different than we've seen it in the past. This is a Selene list that is paired with both of the goblins, and then we also have the Sentry Annihilus combo in what is otherwise sort of like a lockdown deck, but surprising to see Professor X plus Cannonball for sure. And so I've actually, there was a player that played a deck like similar to this a while ago before Cannonball was actually in the game, and I reached out to them to just say like, I don't really get it. I don't get why you play Annihilus and like Hobgoblin. Like, why would Hobgoblin and Green Goblin, these cards aren't really synergistic with Annihilus. Really, sometimes they are. Sometimes if your opponent gets ya and they fill up the location and then you're stuck with a negative power goblin, you can use Annihilus to clean that up and flip a location in a surprising way that your opponent wouldn't expect. But really, the idea behind a junk lockdown list like this is really just the idea that junking your opponent is a good strategy. If you think that junking your opponent is a good strategy, I guess what's important to realize about that is there is sort of like with milling your opponent really does not do anything until you hit a critical massive mill where your opponent like isn't drawing a card on the final turn of the game. Well, same thing with junk strategies. you kind of like, you give your opponent a White Widow, doesn't really do anything. I think Cannonball is probably like the most classic example, because you just cannonball your opponent, doesn't really do much. But the idea just being that like all of these cards in tandem, when you put all of them in the same deck, they just compound on each other to restrict your opponent's potential plays, and therefore they're all kind of stronger together. And that's why we see some success here from Japanese Shadow with the Junk Lockdown. But another kind of crazy deck that we definitely got to talk about here is Rabbit Sweet's Makkari Midnight Dump. And I'm going to be unpacking this one a little bit live right now as I look over it myself. Okay, it is a Silver Surfer list, and this is silly. We are featuring the brand new card Makkari, which, for those of you not familiar with how these tournaments work, they are played on the same day that a new card releases. So Makkari was fresh off the presses here, and this is what Rabbit Sweet came up with. It is, obviously Makkari is pretty good with Silver Surfer because it's like a 0/6, and I guess the idea is getting this Makkari out of your hand, playing a little bit more discard on top of that too, fuels you to put out a strong guy, and then from there we're just playing Nocturne because it is a strong guy. It's a good card. Proxima Midnight is a 0/7 effectively, because you are always going to try to discard it, usually or like optimally with Blade or Lady Sif. Lady Sif will guaranteed always hit that Proxima Midnight. And then you are also adding the Marumasa Shard to your hand with Dakin, which you are also trying to clean up with one of the deck's 4 different discard cards. So the way that this deck is typically going to try to curve out is turn 2 Forge, ideally turn 3 Brood, then turn 4 you're either going to want to play the Dakin or the Nocturne. Turn 5 is where you get to play like any one card, and then here is probably where you play the Blade. You have some flexibility. You can play the Blade either on turn 4 or turn 5. And same thing with Forge. You can technically play turn 5 Forge into Brood. So the fact that the deck's curve is actually like pretty high, you still wind up finding the time to weave in these easily, because just everything costs 3, and then on turn 6 you are just trying to play 2 cards that cost 3, be it Silver Surfer and a discard card, ideally like you've already played your strong guy, and yeah, then I mean the rest of it's pretty straightforward. It's just Silver Surfer, a bunch of cards that cost 3, right? So that Silver Surfer is effectively like a 3/8, which comes with a pretty good rate, and it's really just trying to play a bunch of cards with really good rates. There's not that much interaction in this deck either. We've got the random Destroy of Gambit, and then Nocturne, which is actually really good and just a solid rated 3/5, and can mess with a lot of things. Magic is one of the main things that this can mess with, and that's actually what I want to get to next, because the other thing that Snapster Indonesia compiles here is a win rate, and oh sorry, I already sorted this a little bit here. So this is typically what I look at here: frequency of all of the cards played in the tournament. We'll talk about some of this, but also not only just the frequency here, we also have the win rate for each individual card, which is pretty incredible. I'm trying to see if I can no, okay, I can't. Let me just clear those things out. All right, great. So first, let's just look at frequency. Let's look at the most cards played. If you want to take a look at this data, I will leave a link to this Google Drive in the video description. But first, I gotta talk about Jeff the Baby Land Shark. 33% of players playing it. Most played card in the tournament. Seems like a lot of Jeff, right? If you've been following along with these videos the past few months, where I've been looking at frequency of cards getting played, Jeff was played at almost double the frequency the past few weeks, and it's just been climbing. It's been like 40% all the way, and climbing a steady percentage every single week up to about 66% last week, and now it has dropped down significantly with only 1/3 of the players in the event choosing to play Jeff the Baby Land Shark. So a huge drop off, half the players playing it, and still it is the most played card in the event. Kind of crazy, but as we can see from these deck lists here, I mean, we've got one Jeff in the Loki lists, the two different Angela Loki lists, because it synergizes with Angela. Those lists got like 4th and 5th. I mean, it's still good. It's definitely still good, but definitely a big fall from grace. We do see one Professor X here still, so we might still need a little bit of Jeffrey to keep some people honest, but huge fall off from Jeff. And then I would also say that this is the first time in a little bit that we've actually seen Shang-Chi do well. Shang-Chi made it to the finals, didn't win the tournament, but typically Shang-Chi has not even been performing. It's been very frequent in the decks, but now it has got a really nice 55% win rate. So this is, I guess, to break down, like, why is game seen different from frequency? Because this confused me a little bit at first, so I just want to talk about what these numbers actually mean. So if you win, you get to play another round. It's a single elimination tournament. So every time you lose, you are eliminated, and if you win, you get to play another game, which means you are seen for another game, and then all of those wins across all of the players, where this doesn't mean that like Jeff actually got played in an actual individual game. It just means it was brought by one of the two players in a match, if that makes sense. And yeah, pretty middling rates for Jeff. I think that this is really, really interesting to look at because, well, you can see, like, obviously some really good numbers from some of those destroy cards, though. This data, like 7 Venoms getting played, 8 Carnages getting played, I don't think tell the full story, because what is really crazy here is, okay, 1 Shuri, 1 Nimrod, only 2 players playing that, 1 Doctor Strange, 1 person playing the Proxima Midnight deck list. Actually, Juggernaut, pretty good performance from that. But where is it at here? Jubilee, Swordmaster. Oh, that's right. There were at least 3 Phoenix Force decks. I think there were 5. Let me just scroll down a little bit. Oh, you know what? I should have just sorted by win rate, because this I think is really telling right here. 80% win rate from Phoenix Force. It's not like it was a super well represented deck. There were 5 players playing Phoenix Force and 16 wins split among the 5 of them, but 5 players playing it. It was about I think it was a roughly 60 player event, and yeah, because 19 times 3. So roughly 60 player event, 57 player event maybe, and 3 Phoenix Force players top 8'd. So pretty incredible. And if we look at the data even further, Human Torch and Multiple Man, so only 3 of these Phoenix Force, so like, not to say like one of the Phoenix Force decks we looked at was not playing Human Torch, but really, like, if one of them wasn't even playing Multiple Man, I'm not sure what that deck, you know, like, that's almost like an outlier. And there are deck list stats as well. I don't put as much weight into these because it's really hard sometimes to, like, categorize different deck lists, but we can see one of this is just called like Move Phoenix Force, so that was probably the one that didn't do super well. Then we've got Phoenix Force Loki, Phoenix Force Shuri, and Phoenix Force Destroy, with 2 other Phoenix Force Destroys being like categorized differently, so I'm not sure exactly what's going on there. And I think this data is just tough because of like the nature of how deck construction works in Marvel Snap. It's really tough to say like, oh, this is this type of deck, but it's not this type of deck. Like, okay, 15 Loki decks. How similar were each of those Loki decks? We looked at 3 different Loki decks in this video, really. One happened to be Phoenix Force. They're not categorizing that one as Loki. And then 2 were Angela, the exact same deck list, but one was just like a bunch of tech cards and stuff, which obviously it's going to play a lot differently. So this data I think is like kind of weird to look at, but I do really think it's interesting to look at just like win rates, especially some of this stuff. Like there was only one player playing, I mean, you could figure that out from the deck list stats as well, but only one player was playing the Shuri Nimrod list, and they got 2nd place. So that is a pretty good performance from that. Juggernaut, I thought I just saw had 2 copies, but I guess that only had 1. So these were some of the highest performing cards. I just saw somebody talking trash on Living Tribunal earlier on Twitter, and they were like, oh, I'm definitely not getting that card with my tokens. I think that, I don't know why, but Living Tribunal's like somewhat like an unrespected card, but it's really cool. I love using it on different like featured location days and stuff, but I think there is a lot of fun stuff that can do. What else? I guess like probably the most telling thing. So some of these things are really good to look at, like just like Human Torch. Okay, this could even like the meta is going to correct that. We're going to see some Killmonger next week, I'm sure. However, I think that this is probably the most telling thing just because of how big of a sample size this is right here. I mean, you could say Venom and Carnage are a pretty large sample size too. I think that would be fair. And also Iron Lad, just for like the variety of different deck lists that it can show up in. But Nico, just being able to show up in so many different decks and have a almost 66% win rate, I think is pretty fantastic for a card that put 13 different players chose to play Nico, and it still did so well for like almost all of them. We're also seeing that the Loki and Agent Coulson, by and large, doing pretty well for players this week. On the opposite side of that, I think that the worst win rate cards also tell an interesting story. I don't think this data is as interesting, the cards that just like one player chose to bring a copy of with this stuff. I mean, it probably means that most of these cards, just like if only one player's playing them, most of them aren't that exciting. But this data is where things start to seem a little bit more consistent, like, okay, Crossbones and Scar and Thanos, which is a deck that I just showcased recently on this channel, but apparently not doing so hot. This, I think, is really interesting, though. Armor, 3 copies of it played in the tournament. All 3 players lost their first round. I'm not sure that that's correct. I think we're going to see Armor do well next week if players choose to kind of get on the bandwagon of Destroy and Phoenix Force, and people want to combat that with Armor. So Armor, the data might be a little bit misleading, but here I think this block is where the data is pretty telling. Magic, absolutely terrible to be playing right now. Apparently Hope Summers as well. Yondu, that is pretty straightforward. And then here's like a great example. Rogue and Luke Cage. Tech cards against things that we did not see do well. So there was no, I mean, I know you can play Luke Cage proactively too. You can play it in Hela now. You can play it in your own hazmat lists, and then you can play it like alongside Valentina or some weird stuff like that. It does get played in Cerebro lists as well, but it doesn't specifically hate on anything we saw crack into the top 8 even. Neither really does Rogue, right? The Devil Dinosaur, the Living Tribunal, but he can't really Rogue a Living Tribunal, so I don't know about that one. And the fact that these cards were played just in such large numbers, but they weren't really hating on the metagame as it was represented, reflects why they did so poorly. Magic is kind of like the other side of that coin, it's a proactive game plan that gets hated on by the Quinjets and the Nocturnes that we saw pretty heavily featured both throughout this tournament and the top 8 specifically. Hope Summer's not doing super hot. And what else do we have? Looks like kind of like some Thanos things, kind of some Cerebro things. Enchantress, again, just like not hating on specific things that we were seeing. And then Dr. Octopus kind of goes along with Yondu, another sort of mill card. But I guess Mill does really want to use that magic and all of the hate for magic. So definitely not a great time to be playing Magic. Anything else interesting in here? Probably not at these numbers. Shadow King actually not doing super well, which is interesting. Luke Cage is a good tech card against Shadow King, but yeah, that's kind of interesting numbers right there, that really did not pull through. Mobius also, I mean, Mobius is good against Loki, but Mobius not really like representing otherwise against the other archetypes that we saw, so that's kind of interesting. Bunch of things at 50% here, not sure why Jeff says that. And then yeah, everything else that we already saw. Any other cool stuff? Mr. Sinister. Okay, so I was actually just kind of thinking, I just took a walk and I was thinking, I feel like Mr. Sinister is underrepresented right now with Cersei. I feel like because everybody was playing like Brood with Cersei, I just feel like that's such a commitment, because then like you can't play Squirrel Girl, you can't play Mysterio, otherwise you're locked out of that location from your Brood plus your 1 token, you won't be able to play your Cersei. I think Mr. Sinister could be a really cool and cheap card for Cersei. So I think that is pretty interesting. And then, yeah, we have that Makkari deck list, which I'm really not sure about. I'll throw that back on the screen here to end this video. But it is really cool just to always see what people are brewing with in the first week of a new card's release. Let me know what you think about this and the absolutely dominating performance from Phoenix Force this week, as well as Loki, but that's not really exciting. We've seen Loki dominate before, but now Phoenix Force is on top. For today, that is going to be it for me. Thank you guys very much for watching. I'm NoLucksGiven. Peace.